I see a lot of people who are fixated on it needs these certain characteristics, and otherwise it's a no-go. Like for me, I mean, look, the heritage is very working capital intensive. We have a lot of inventory. We have a long sales cycle. That's painful at points. There are other businesses that are heavy CapEx. There are other businesses that have labor issues. Everything has problems. You just sort of have to choose your hard. Pick what you're willing to deal with.
There's an entire generation of Americans who no longer care about prestige, titles, work travel, fancy offices, and lunches. Welcome to Mundane Millionaires, a podcast for this generation of small business owners who want to set their ego aside and focus on what matters: family, community, quality of life, and cash flows. In each episode, Eric Pacifici and Kevin Henderson uncover what it takes to get a little money in the bank, control your time, and invest in building great families and lives. Let's get started.
Eric, super fascinating conversation with Kevin Bibelhausen this week. What did you think? What were your takeaways or highlights?
Well, Kevin is he's an interesting guy. He's had an interesting journey to entrepreneurship through acquisition entrepreneurship. Had a busted deal in 2018 that he talks about, kind of fell out there. Then he had, a life-threatening medical condition during COVID in 2021 that, almost frankly took him out. But he talks about kind of how that colored his perspective.
Yeah.
And, then he gets into the lifestyle of being the CEO and kind of the working the longer hours, but having the greater sense of fulfillment and enjoyment in that work that I think we all kind of strive for. So it was fun to hear from Kevin. He's had a winding path to entrepreneurship.
No, absolutely. And I thought that was one of the most interesting things about Kevin's story also is, coming not from a business background. There are a lot of people that kind of look at business buying like, oh, that's great for the MBAs and business school people, but that's not me. I don't have that type of background in finance or business. And, just such a great story. Kevin was a music major and kind of professional, semi-professional opera singer and actor, and how he wound his way eventually to the CEO seat of a pretty large, from small business perspective, a pretty large company. Just super inspiring story for a lot of people that may feel like that's unattainable even for them, not having a business degree or something. So great discussion.
The full life cycle, Kevin, because he goes from
Totally
average guy, typical normal guy, non-business guy, all the way to struggling through the entrepreneurship through acquisition process, acquiring the business, and now he's a CEO and he's raising a fund to actually invest in other searchers. And so seeing that full life cycle,
such a great cycle.
Typical, Kevin's a great guy, but he's a typical guy, and it's fun to hear those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hope everyone enjoys and can take something from this episode. So enjoy our chat with Kevin Bibelhausen. Well, Kevin, it's good to catch up and have you on Mundane Millionaires. Super excited to talk about you. It's been a minute, but you've been a longtime friend of Eric and I since we jumped. Well, I say long time since we really jumped into the ETA space a year ago. It feels like a lifetime. So.
In a lot of ways, it does. Yeah, I mean, we met you and I met on Twitter, and you were actually the first one that I DM'd for SMB Twitter. I think you know that, but maybe not.
No, 100%. I recall because we had a meeting before our law firm, SMB Law Group, even formally launched. I don't remember if we met in person. I was trying to remember if we met for coffee or if we just chatted by phone. We didn't. Originally.
Yeah, I think it was just by phone, and then you invited me to go to the meetup in South Lake or Grapevine, wherever it was. And from there, actually my friend Sam runs this boot camp. You should go check it out. So I did. That's, and then all three of you were there. So that's where I met Eric, and that's where I met Sam for the first time. So yeah, I mean, you're kind of my gateway. You're kind of my entry point into SMB.
Yeah, we met at the boot camp. It's hard to keep it in context. Yeah. By the way, the two Kevin thing, this should be fun. So
you'll manage.
Refer to you guys.
There's not many times where two Kevins get on the same call. It's kind of rare.
Right. 90s kids.
Yeah.
80s, whatever it was.
Well, just to set the stage, and for those watching the podcast as opposed to listening, they're seeing what looks like a relatively empty office with a few Duke basketballs in the background. But fast forward from when you and I originally met, I mean, maybe hard to come through on video, but you're sitting in the CEO chair. So
Yeah.
catch us up for a second on where you are today, and then we want to dig into sort of your journey and story into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So in January of this year, 2023, I bought Heritage Fabrics, which is a what they call a textile converter. We're functionally a middleman between sort of the interior design companies or companies that sell direct to interior design and the mills that produce product. A lot of I mean, if you've been in the southeast region in the Virginia, North Carolinas, you can see that there's been a lot of closing of mills and a lot of factory plants or furniture plants, and it's really kind of decimated the economy here. It's coming back, but all that to say is it's not very profitable to weave in the United States anymore. You can, but it's certainly not as prevalent as it once was. So what we do is we're more of a design house. So we've got designers here that develop product, that do the color work, that go out and talk to the customers, and then we outsource manufacturing overseas to a couple different countries, and then import the products and sell it sort of wholesale to the companies that go and direct to designers or furniture manufacturers or whatever. So we're kind of in the middle there, but it's a nice place to be in the supply chain, in my opinion. I mean, we kind of, our lifeblood is inventory. The reason they would go direct to us instead of going overseas is, number one, we have lower order quantities, lower MOQs for people. We could do, cut yardage, whereas overseas they want, 300 to 500 yards at a time. But yeah, so we're a lot more flexible, and obviously we can deliver, within a couple of days because we're onshore here in the States.
Yeah. So back up to when we met a year ago, if I had asked you when we met originally in person, and I had said, hey, a year from now, we're going to be chatting and you're going to be the owner of a textiles company, what would the response have been? I mean, how did you end up with Heritage Fabrics?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been positive. I mean, I was looking at, I think if you would have stopped that sentence and said, like, you would have been in the CEO's, I knew that was going to be the case because I was absolutely hell-bent on getting this done. And you guys, were very kind through my whole search and acquisition process. But I know I was a bit of a maniac because I wanted it so bad to get this deal across, or get any deal across the finish line, any deal that I thought was a good deal. I wanted to do this. I was 100% sure.
Yeah.
I was totally bought in. So if you were to stop your sentence there, like, hey, you're going to be the CEO in a year, I'd have been like, great, I agree. But then, the next part of the sentence, it's going to be for a textile company. We're like, okay, well, I don't know anything about textiles. I started my search in the healthcare. I come from the healthcare industry where I was mainly in a technology strategy and ops. And so, I mean, naturally, the businesses I started to look at were healthcare businesses and IT service businesses, both of which are quite overvalued, especially at, in healthcare. You look at the 2021 numbers for COVID, those are record years for a lot of those companies, and surprise, all the sellers want, to trade on those banner years. I would too, if I were them, but I wasn't going to give them, and I wasn't going to overpay for those businesses. I couldn't afford to overpay.
Which financial impact of those years aside, healthcare and IT services and things like that are already trading at higher multiples
Premiums.
Than some other, certainly like, distribution, manufacturing, home services and things like that. So it's kind of double whammy as you're launching the search in 2022.
Yeah,
in those
and IT services, there's some that trade at reasonable multiples, but I regularly would get people asking for 9 to 13x, on an IT services company, just because it was in a cool industry. Like, here's one in the gaming industry, and it's going to trade for 13x. Like, well, not to me, but good luck to you. But I mean, it would be a cool business, but not that cool. So anyway, I'm looking for, I got a little, a dose of reality after, I don't know, 6 months or so, kind of beating my head against the wall, looking for these two different, industries, and realized I need to be a little bit more agnostic industry wise. And, came across this textile company, which I didn't quite realize it at the time, but it is a pretty good fit for my background and my temperament. But the things I liked about the business were incredibly practical. Like they had audited or reviewed financials for the last decade. How many small businesses
Yeah.
have audited or reviewed financials for the last decade?
Eric,
Not
I'm
many
sure.
of them.
Yeah, why was that, Kevin?
Oh, it's because of the next point where why I bought the business is because the ownership group they're serious people. They're, the CFO of the company was a former Fortune 1000 textile CFO. Like they took it seriously. And I also think that early on they had mezz debt, and the mezz lenders wanted that, but they continued that practice far after they paid off that debt. So I mean it was something that they were going to do, and they incurred that expense every year. And it was a huge reason why I bought this business, because when I did QFE, I knew things would flush out, and they did. Within a reasonable margin, but I mean I knew exactly what I was buying. That's again my experience in this industry, or this search space, is that that's not very normal. It's a lot more cocktail, numbers on the back of a cocktail napkin versus, here's the entire, here's the books for the last, 15 years or whatever. That's pretty great. So I had a lot of confidence in what they were doing. I trusted the sellers. They're really great people. I did an on-site meeting, and you sit across from them and look them in the eye, like, okay, is this person going to screw me, or are these people, are they for real? And you just know, after one conversation, just like these guys are legit. Like they care about their employees. They want it to remain independent. That's why I'm looking at this business, and they're not trying to sell it to a strategic or something, because they believe that the business needs to remain independent for the industry. And as I travel around to different customers now, that's becoming more and more apparent why the seller did that and how appreciated that is by the customers, that we're not now a division of a larger company or what have you, or even like a large private equity shop or something. It's my family business. There are most of these companies in this industry are second, third, fourth generation businesses. And so now I'm kind of in the same category, right? It's, we're not multi-generational, but we're in that family business ethos.
It's still the family owned.
It fits. Yeah.
Ethos.
It fits with it. Yeah, exactly. It fits with the industry.
Interesting.
And Kevin, you had a busted deal previously, right? Was this search at all?
I had two. Yeah. Well, you mean in 2018 when I first started?
Well,
I've had a lot of busted deals.
Yeah, I know that
Yeah.
you had one that really kind of you had mentioned a few times, and you had learned a lot from it. What aspects of this search and this acquisition were kind of colored by that experience?
So I mean,
tell us about the busted deal first of all. Back up to that.
So I'll kind of go backwards. So in my search in 22, I went through a few LOIs like most people do. You send it out, it falls apart for early in financing. And at that point, I knew when to cut bait, because I had gone through my experience in 2018 it was just when the Harvard Business Review or the HBR guide came out, buying small businesses. And I listened to a podcast about it. So it came out in 2017. I read it in 2018, was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And I've told this story, to just about anybody who will listen as when you read the story, that's, this guy bought a porta potty business. This is exactly what I want to do. This is it. I want to own that company. Textile is a bit different from that, but the attitude still applies. But I went out and I found business through a normal broker that I'm sure everybody's heard of. It was an e-commerce business, and it was a small deal, but it was all I could really afford at the time. It turns out I couldn't actually afford it, because what happens was I got kind of the runaround and lending, and had the whole deal worked out. It wasn't a great deal. I didn't know what I was doing. They tried to charge more for inventory, and whatever. I let them kind of pull the wool over my eyes a little bit. But I got towards the end of the deal, and we were going through underwriting, and they had asked me for X in equity. Then they came back and they're like, actually, we need 2X. And I said, well, that's all the money I have. And it was a significant sum of money for me at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was for me at the time. And just, I didn't know how to raise capital. I didn't know you could raise capital for a self-funded deal. I'm not even sure those terms existed back then. SMB Twitter certainly didn't exist. Like the whole infrastructure that has popped up around this space is kind of wild. And you guys are obviously a part of that in the last couple of years. But I mean, when I was doing this in 2018, it was traditional search guys, and that's pretty much it. or at least, certainly wasn't as talked about or common to do any sort of self-funded thing. So it busted because I didn't know how to go get extra equity. I didn't know I could. And so I just folded on the deal and kind of licked my wounds and went back to my corporate gig before I, ended up with a health crisis in 21 due to COVID and was in and out of the hospital. And, it was one of those clarifying experiences that you go through and you're kind of left with a decision. After recovery, you're looking for something to look forward to, or even through recovery, you're looking for something to put on the horizon. And the thing I put on the horizon was I still want to buy a business. So that was 3-4 years later. And, I had not lost that desire. I just kind of sat on the sidelines, just doing my corporate gig. So that really kind of gave me the renewed passion to get out there and make it happen. Because if it wasn't going to be now, when was it going to be? I'd always have an excuse to put it off. So
as you're getting to that point though, how did you bridge that gap? Right. So, a lot of people who hear about buying a business are probably in the seat where you were in 2018. Like that sounds awesome. It sounds like you can have a great career and work for yourself, but yeah, they have no idea the terms, how to do it, what an equity raise is, what's possible and things like that. And could easily get burned. For someone that's worried about that, what did you do coming out of your health crisis, for lack of a better word, in 21 with COVID to kind of fix and address so that when you kicked off a new search again in 2022, you were a fundamentally different searcher, right? You're armed with a bunch of new and better information to protect against 2018 happening all over again. What did that look like?
It was basically education, education that didn't exist in 2018. I was kind of going through it on my own in 2018, just reading the HBR guide, which is, I think a little bit more slanted towards the, traditional search as you might expect. But sure. There just wasn't the education out there for self-funded. And I didn't really realize that's what I was trying to do. Like I don't even think there was any sort of title around that at that point. I could be wrong, but no, it was in 22. That was when I met you. That was when I got hooked up at the boot camp at Fruition Capital. And it was at that point I had been through enough, especially with my deal that took, it took forever to die in 2018. I just kept clinging on to it. So I made a bunch of mistakes. And so at that point I kind of knew what I didn't want to do, or what I did wrong, or what I let them make me believe or whatever. And so I knew I needed people. I needed community in order to actually get this thing done. Right. And I talk to searchers all the time now. And so it's like, this is a team sport. Like you have to have people in your corner or people to talk to, do a sanity check, just the networking piece of this is so important. And, I was talking to some other people the other day and it sounds trite to say, just get on Twitter and start, but you kind of need to, especially if not everybody, and I don't know anybody that's got people in their area that talk about business buying all the time. You have to go seek those people out who are all over the country, and a lot of them congregate, on Twitter or another platform. But you need to find people that are like-minded and going through the same things together. And that's one of the reasons I'm also now, I've kind of moved from the search phase to the CEO phase, and I'm doing, these CEO groups with people who have gone through the same process, right? So
Sure.
There's a moderator who's seasoned and can kind of give us advice. And then there's, a bunch of first or second time CEOs in the group. And so it's helpful to kind of, be able to bat some of these questions around and have that safe space to ask really dumb questions. So I don't look like a fool in front of my staff, Yeah.
So you've really taken that community ethos. I didn't know this. So it's bridged right into this new role as a CEO.
Totally.
I think that's such undervalued advice because, people look at the CEO as kind of the lone wolf at the top, sort of dictating down without realizing, to do it that way has got to be pretty lonely. I imagine CEO groups like that are just outrageously invaluable.
Yeah. And I think search was lonelier than being a CEO. And that's probably because I have networking groups now to be a CEO, and those are a lot more common, right? But anything in search, search is really lonely, especially those of us who are doing self-funded. So like I like the little groups that pop up, that have like Steve Ressler's group, like the Bryden group. They've got that little cohort and they meet, regularly, and they have that sort of sense of community, in a more traditional search model. But, for self-funded, it's basically just you and your laptop in your house and you're just grinding through it. And it's lonely, man. Like you got to really want it in order to get through all the crap and to deal with all the brokers and deal with, all the things that, will break a deal. And it's stressful, and but it's worth it if you can get through to the end. It's a process that I'm glad I went through. And I think at that point I was hardened enough and I was committed enough. What did I have to lose at that point? I was just going to kind of keep grinding through.
I'm caught off guard by what do I have to lose? I mean, I got to imagine there are a lot of listeners laughing out loud at that. I mean,
right.
There's a lot riding on this.
Yeah. And Kevin, at the time, I mean, you were living in North Texas. You had a, large property with horses, if I recall correctly. Your wife, Sarah's passionate about horses. And you had to, I don't know if you've sold that property yet or you're in the process of selling.
Working on it.
What's that?
Working on it. Yeah,
to move, to rural North Carolina or, small town North Carolina, and obviously a world of opportunity for somebody like yourself. And yet you chose small business entrepreneurship and B2B textiles. I mean, you had a lot to lose.
Yeah. It's an interesting, I think it's my perspective now after being, I have almost died and almost had a heart transplant and everything. So once you go through something like that and you talk to, palliative care, do end of life care in the hospital, sign all your documents, all your wills, all your stuff. A lot of things look a lot less stressful than going through that. A lot less risky than going through that.
Can we pause there for a second? Because you can't, I mean, you can't say going through end of life care and palliative care and leave it at that. So take a step back for a second and, to the extent you don't mind sharing, because I think it's important to frame your frame of mind going into closing on this deal. What happened in 2021? Just walk us through briefly.
So I mean, I got COVID. As I said, I was in healthcare, and where I contracted it, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I got COVID, and I was one of the unfortunate few who got myocarditis because of it. So podcasts are an audio platform, but I'm gonna make a visual demonstration here where my heart goes from,
as well. So
right. So from a small size to a large size, and it's funny when, you go back and look at some of those scans. I mean, they found it because I was in a car accident a couple of years before, and they had an image of my heart this size. And then when they did another scan after I went back into the emergency department and it was, this big, they realized there's a problem. And, within 5 minutes of being in the ED, which is the hospital I worked in, after 5 minutes of being in the emergency department, the doctor's like, you're going to need a heart transplant. And to go, I showed up at the hospital thinking like, it's some kind of gastric thing. It's hard to describe. You're full of fluid, if you got, a heart issue like that, and you feel very buoyant. And so to me, it felt like, I was like, it's a stomach thing. And I was throwing up and all that kind of stuff. And, it's not something you ever think about at 30, that there's a potential, or there was an issue with your heart. You never think that that's the cause. Right. I didn't have any history of heart issues in my family, none of that. So what they ended up doing was they kept me in the hospital for a while, obviously. They put in what's called a PICC line, which is like a semi-permanent IV. It's like a central line that goes straight down to your heart. And they fed me with what the cardiologists would affectionately call rocket fuel, which basically supported my heart as I was going through titrating up oral medications. And, frankly, I was unlucky that I contracted it, but I was lucky in that I contracted it while I was young. And I was lucky that my body responded to the medication. I was lucky that, my age was low enough to be able to fight be a little bit stronger than somebody who would have been, in their 70s or 80s going through heart failure. And I mean, just the fact that I was able to respond well to the medication. I mean, I was very fortunate, but going through all of that stuff, I mean, in order to do a transplant, you get seen by every department in the hospital. So every department comes to see you. There's even a dentist that comes to see you. And one of the people that comes to see you, besides the chaplain, to talk about end of life, is palliative care. And that's end of life care. That's, talking about what happens if something goes wrong. What happens? Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you
Right.
want to, and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, you kind of put all your last wishes on a document, and it's kept by the hospital, and then you just kind of cross your fingers. But fortunately, I didn't have to go under the knife. I didn't have to have my chest opened and my heart replaced. I was able to recover on the oral medication and then eventually get off the IV around Thanksgiving of 21, so right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So it was about 11 months I had it in. Yeah.
So you're obviously, you recover from that, and you've got to be feeling like, fuck it, I got to go live life. I mean,
exactly. No, and that's so it may sound flip when I say, what did I have to lose? But at that point, what did I have to lose? I mean, I'd kind of already been through, I'd been through a near-death experience, and I don't think you go through something like that and not have your perspective changed. I think anybody who's experienced any sort of health crisis like that, personally or in their family, I think you tend to look at things a little bit different. And, for me, the things that seemed risky before don't seem as risky, or, they do, but you're willing to take the risk because what the hell else are you going to do? What are you going to do? Just sit on the sidelines and not do something because you're afraid to do it? That's kind of a crappy way to live.
Yeah.
And so for me, yeah, go ahead.
It sort of resets your viewpoint about what the stakes are, is kind of the way I think about it. Cause yeah, I mean, it's absolutely risky to sign a personal guarantee on a $5 million loan with a small business that you've done, 8 weeks of diligence on, or whatever. Like, you can't say that's not risky, but the stakes all of a sudden seem so much different that it makes the other intangibles of that entrepreneurship journey seem so much more important, right? Because it's like, yeah, I mean, I could lose everything financially, but now I get to be at my kid's t-ball game at 3:00 every Tuesday or whatever. And all of a sudden the stakes of those things start to shift, where it's like, yeah, I could lose money. I mean, I don't want to minimize the importance of your financial life, but anyway.
Well, it's
Eric's
in a profound way, though, right, Kevin? I mean, so we had a situation about a year ago next month where we got a terminal misdiagnosis for my 2-year-old. And when they told us, hey, your 2-year-old's dying, they said, oh, there's also a 50-50 chance that your 4-year-old is dying too, because it's a genetic condition. We had to live with that for a month. And what you don't realize is, you think that, for our video watchers, you think that the realm of potential outcomes is this wide, right? You've lived your life for 30 plus years, and best case scenario, worst case scenario. And then what you realize is the ceiling for what is possible in terms of negative things that can happen when it pertains to health and your family. It's so much more profound than you could ever even conceptualize. That, unfortunately, obviously, to round that out, everybody's fine, everybody's healthy as a misdiagnosis, but it definitely augments the reality that you live in, and you cannot explain it, right? You cannot even begin to grasp it until you've been where you've been or where I've been. And so, yeah, and frankly, when you see people like that have lived through that, or lived through really the hardest life traumatic stuff, those are the people to invest in, and those are the people because they appreciate life, I think, at a different level, and they get the potential circumstances to a different degree. I don't know if you see it.
Yeah,
experience, Kevin, but yeah.
Oh, totally. No, it is incredibly hard to describe, and it's just one of those things I hope nobody listening to this ever experiences, but it is, it is true. It's just one of those things you go through, and you can't help but be changed by it. I think unless you're a sociopath, I think you can't help but be changed by it. But I think the other thing that is so important to kind of call out too is like your visualization of the range of things, the range of outcomes. Everybody on this call or this podcast, I guess, was you guys far more than me, because you're not that much older than me, but you're far more successful professionally than I was. But you had done everything the right way. You had kind of done exactly what was expected. If you check the boxes, you went to good schools, you went to good law schools, and then you went to go work for top firms, right? And you had kind of lived your life by taking these steps and doing exactly what you're supposed to do. And I sort of ended up doing something like that, but you feel like you're putting in the work. You feel like you're doing, this is the path. And then you go through something like that, and then your eyes kind of are open to like, there's more out there than just working at a top 10 law firm or working, at a top hospital or, who cares? Like, wouldn't you rather wear, a golf shirt and sit in your house and talk to me today versus,
Right.
trying to schmooze and manage up to a partner at some firm? Or, I've seen some of the pictures that are floating around on Twitter with people who have their, I think it was
cuffs.
Bradford. Yeah.
Yeah.
Monogram cuffs and stuff. And you're like, yeah, just who cares?
I would like to say
at one
for the
point you
record
cared
that I never monogrammed a shirt. Okay. So
I did. I monogrammed a few shirts, and I took them to Goodwill actually recently, and I kind of had a chuckle because I haven't worn a suit now in 3 years. Not even for an occasion, right? Like nothing.
Right.
And I don't care at all. And now I think I'm to the point where I don't know that there is an occasion that I'll wear a suit, maybe a wedding.
Well, that's just the Florida man coming out.
I can't wait to invite Eric to my kids' weddings, and he's gonna show up in that polo and
how about this
shorts,
one? Actually,
J1s. And, Kevin, I want to keep going on that thread, but a slightly different direction, only because I think you have another unique aspect to, your path to entrepreneurship, in that you didn't grow up, professionally speaking, in the business world. And so a lot of people, right, when you go through college and you study finance and you work at a private equity fund, or you go become a manager at a, corporate office or whatever, you kind of work up through the business world and then decide like, yeah, I can take this business skill set I've been building since I was 18 years old, and I can pivot it over to my own thing and buy a business. That's not necessarily your history. So even pre kind of health issue and things like that, you ended up working in the corporate world without that sort of business background and things like that. Like, walk us through where you studied in college and things like that, to where you started transitioning into the corporate world and thinking about entrepreneurship even before that initial search in 2018.
Yeah. So I grew up wanting to do something different than what my dad did. And my dad was, I don't know if you guys know this, my dad was a professional trumpet player, went to Cincinnati Conservatory of Music.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So he went to a couple years of conservatory there. Yeah, no, I know. I remember you've got trumpets in the back. And he decided 2 years, my dad's smarter than me. He was 2 years into his conservatory education, decided like, well, I can't really make a living doing this. So, and not the living I wanted. So he ended up going to sweep floors at a pharmacy, and then ended up going to pharmacy school and being a manager, and now did his whole corporate career. It took me a little bit longer to realize that. So I also went to music school thinking that I was doing something different than my dad, because I was going to finish. And I did 2 degrees. I did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. I didn't do trumpet. I was an opera singer, and I did that sort of semi-professionally, did a couple small gigs, but realized a lot later than my dad that, hey, you actually can't make a good living doing this. Like, it's very difficult if you don't have a sponsor, you don't have family money, you don't have, it's just, you don't make a lot. And so I kind of figured out that like, okay, well, I wasn't going to go, I thought about going the academic route and getting my doctorate and going to teach at a university, doing stuff like that. But even that, like, I didn't want to put myself in the middle of, Podunk, USA, to go teach at a school. I wanted to have more control over where I lived.
And if half of our listeners, Kevin.
No, it's the truth though, because like it's sort of like being in the military in a way, where like you kind of get told where you're going, because there are only so many academic jobs that open up, right? And you're at that point, you can't afford to be picky. So
absolutely. You may have never envisioned yourself in Topeka, Kansas, and all of a sudden
that's where the job is. So that's where you're going. Yeah, exactly. And I'm from flyover country, so maybe that gives me a little bit of a pass there. I'm from the Midwest. So, but yeah, so I looking at that kind of stuff, I quickly, or not so quickly, realized that, I needed to go back into corporate. I followed my dad into healthcare. So again, this is me the entire time thinking that I'm doing stuff different than my dad, when in reality I didn't. Went into healthcare, worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a little bit. and eventually made my way into health systems where I was doing technology strategy and ops. But every time I moved roles, it was, I mean, I didn't have that business background that you were talking about. Like I didn't have any formal education. It was just, school of hard knocks, just figuring it out like plenty of people do in corporate, right? There's plenty of liberal arts majors, who do quite well in corporate roles who don't have, necessarily a finance degree or whatever. But yeah, a lot of it was just on the job training. And when I came out of my health issue, that was one of the reasons, I enrolled at Duke, was because I wanted the formal education. I wanted there to be no reason that somebody wouldn't trust me with capital, that somebody wouldn't trust me with capital, and that I was giving myself every opportunity to succeed at buying a company, right? Like I didn't want to make sure, I wanted to make sure that there was no secret sauce that you learn at an MBA that I would miss out on to run my company. I mean, the truth is there's not, right? It's not, you don't need an MBA to run a small business. But for me, it was important to do that. For me, I wanted to have the formal education. I wanted to have the experience of going through a program. So yeah, sort of in a roundabout way, I found myself getting the formal business education, but certainly didn't start that way.
That's super interesting. And in the grand scheme of things, it means nothing, but let's get a little bit controversial here, because we see this argument all the time, and it kind of drives me a little bit crazy. So I apologize in advance for derailing us, Eric. But I'm so thinking back to your education in music and where you sit now in a CEO chair. Is there anything you draw from as you look back to college? Because we see this argument all the time that like, don't go to college and get a liberal arts major, because if you major in interpretive dance, you're throwing away money and it's completely worthless. You should just go, whatever it is. Where do you come down in this argument? What do you draw from your experience as a music major now sitting in the CEO chair? Or do you agree that like, yeah, if I could go back again, I never would have studied music because it was worthless? Like where do you come down on that question?
First of all, I got a full ride scholarship to both places. So I came out debt free. I would do it again. And there's plenty of people that graduate with a ton of student loans. And so if you're taking on a lot of debt to go do a liberal arts degree, it's probably not the best idea. But if you're able to do it for free and do something you love, I think that's perfectly fine. Obviously, you can be successful in a lot of different areas doing that. I would say, there's certainly skills that you develop. And I can just speak from my experience since, as a musician and as an actor, I use those skills all the time. I use those skills. It's the presentation skills. It's the, speaking in public. It's the interacting with people. It's a lot of the collaboration. Sort of the same, some of the similar things with athletics, like the teamwork and the collaboration and the working with others and getting along and all that stuff. It's incredibly important in a musical ensemble, just as it would be, on an athletic field. So I draw on that all the time. And the other thing that I don't think I realized until relatively recently was that, doing the whole music thing and being a career musician, you are the CEO of your career. And it's not something that I managed very well, in my 20s when I was doing it. But you're your own PR person. You're oftentimes your own agent because, you haven't gotten representation yet. You're your own audio person. You're the product. You're the business manager. You're, the bookkeeper. You're all of it. Mainly because you can't afford to hire anybody. So you got to figure it out. And so, yeah, like stuff like that actually, I think matters to kind of go through that whole process of you do learn to sell a product. You do. I've schlepped my bag through New York, a big old shoulder bag that I had because I couldn't afford. I stayed in a hostel in New York, which I would never do now. It was like $150 a night or something. And so there's a shared bathroom and everything. And I couldn't afford anything else. But that's when I traveled to New York for auditions, that's where I stayed. And I couldn't afford to spend the money for an additional night. So on the last day for auditions, I had to carry my bag around the city and leave it outside the audition room. And yeah, man, but that stuff teaches you how to grind. I really think it does, because let me tell you, that sucks to have a huge bag, that you're schlepping through the streets of New York, on and off of subways, trying to figure it out. And then you just got to go and perform in front of 5 or 6 people who are maybe 10 feet away, You might be the last thing between them and lunch, and they're just doing this the whole time, just not paying attention because
Yeah.
they're worried about where their next meal is coming from. Yeah, I've done it all, and that's you want to talk about a bruise to your ego? That's a bruise to your ego. You spent the money to get there, you spent the time to audition, you spent all this stuff, and it's just like whatever. You're there to audition, and yeah, so I think that does build a lot of resilience. I would say,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't prove it that created some of the nature to grind for me, but I think it absolutely helped in kind of learning how to do that, how to get through stuff like that.
No, it's super fascinating. I'd never really thought about the performative aspect to managing and leading when you put it in that context. Because you can contrast, right? If you've ever worked for people in the past, and we all have, right? You can contrast like that person you worked for where you always knew 100% what was going on in their life because there was just like, you got who you got and there was no kind of ability to filter versus that person that was always, irrespective of what may have been going on, was able to turn on that performative aspect, right? To still inspire and lead, notwithstanding, what they're dealing with when they get back to their desk or step outside of the office. And, that's
Right.
not to say it's always 100% mentally healthy to just, mask what's going on in your life. But I think it is an underrated skill in management that's fascinating to think about when you put it in those terms. It's similar to when I hear lawyers like talk about how much they hate sales, and I just kind of like laugh, and I'm like, good luck being
What
a
is it
lawyer.
you think you do here?
Yeah,
At the firm.
But anyway.
So speaking of which, Kev, let's switch gears for just a second. So you closed on your deal how long ago, Kev?
Middle of January.
January. Okay, so we're going on 6 months. Tell us about the lifestyle, right? And compare it to your corporate life before, the control you have, the amount of hours you work, how it feels on a daily basis, and whether you have any regrets.
Well, bottom line up front, I don't have any regrets. It's a much better lifestyle, and it's not because of the fewer hours. I'm working more hours now, but I don't care. Like I'm here on the weekends. I'm here late at night. Sometimes it's different because it's my own, and I'm building something that I am going to be proud of, and that I'm going to reap the financial rewards for. I'll actually, if I do it right, I'll be rewarded for the work that I put in. That wasn't the case in a corporate job because there's, you get paid a salary and you complete the work or you don't. And if you complete the work, your reward is more work.
Come on, you got rewarded with a 2.13% annual raise. Okay.
Not when you're in public health IT and your salary is capped because you make too much money transferring into the role and they don't even raise your salary. Yeah. Take it all back. Listen, man, public health IT, there's not a lot of money to be made in public health IT. I'm really, really good at choosing professions that don't make a nickel. So, hopefully that's not the case in the textile world or in the micro PE world, whatever we're calling this. But yeah, for the majority of my career, I've not optimized for a dollar. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough. So no regrets, right? Like take us down the road a little more about how things look different though. Like I get it.
Sure.
There's some extra hours. Like anyone going into entrepreneurship thinking they're, doing a 4-hour work week, is likely pulling the wool over their eyes, at least at the start. But how else have things changed and just in terms of like,
yeah. I mean, when I was in Dallas, I was driving an hour into the hospital every day. And then things changed with COVID. And so we were remote at first I was in the command center doing all the disaster management. And then we realized, hey, we probably shouldn't all be in this command center. As we learned about how everything's spread and we're all, congregating in this room and all the infection preventionists are running around like, this is dumb. We need to disband this command center and make it virtual. So eventually we did that. And, I started working from home, and like everybody else, there was that adjustment period and like, this is pretty cool. I like this. You're able to feel like you have a little bit more control of your life, but it was pretty lonely. I would be shocked if you guys didn't feel this way. It's like just the Zoom meeting fatigue and just being on camera all the time. It's exhausting. And, so right now I think if I were to write out a wish list as I was buying a company, it would have been like, if I could work remote at this company I would buy and the team distributed across the country, that would be ideal. I'm not sure that's true, because now I really enjoy being in the office here. I enjoy, talking to the employees every day. I enjoy interacting with them. I bring my dogs into work, and now I have to make sure that, one of them has been adopted by one of the employees here, who's just gave him literally a plate of chicken right after she gave him some doggy ice cream that she picked up for him. I mean, it's just like, stuff that, it's nice. It's a family environment. It's, people genuinely care about each other. They genuinely, especially this team, they've been together for 15 years. So they are like family, for better or for worse. That is true here. So I don't know. I like that. I like that it's a little bit more family oriented, that it's a little more relaxed, that I can do things like bring my dogs into the office and have them be, welcomed, and people enjoy, visiting with them and having sort of the levity kind of brought into the office. It's not stuffy. It's not, I'm not coming in here trying to institute a bunch of structure. It's just, it's a family business, and we run it that way. And that's not something that would ever happen at a corporate environment like I was in. Not the least, it's a hospital, so you can't bring your pets and everything in there, but even just, could you bring your dog into your law firm? Like, no, that's not the way. That wouldn't be acceptable.
It depends on if you're remote or not, but
yeah, right.
I could have done it. I could have done it once, Kevin. I'll put it that way. I could have done it once.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. On your last day.
That's right. That's right. No, that's super interesting. Well, really appreciate you joining us, Kevin. We're coming up on time here. Would love to wrap up just with your thoughts. We've kind of meandered a little bit, but summarize for people listening who get to the point that I know you got to in your journey, where you're like, on your deal, your company you own now, where you're like, this deal's not closing, right? The deal's falling apart again. This isn't going to close. Like, I'm never going to get there. Like, am I ever going to actually close the deal and be a CEO? Talk for a second to that person that's just feeling like, man, I've been searching for a year. I've been researching for a year. I can't find the right business. I found what I thought was a good business, and it's all falling out from under me. Like, what did you do to get from that point to the closing table?
So I think there's two answers. And the first one is, make sure you're not being too picky, because I see a lot of people out there who have a wish list, and it's sort of like finding a partner, right? You can have your sort of wish list, but at the end of the day, you're either in love or you're not, and you can make it work. And, you either want to put the work in to make it work, or you don't. So I see a lot of people who are just, who are fixated on it needs these certain characteristics, and, otherwise it's a no-go. Like for me, look, the heritage is very working capital intensive. We have a lot of inventory. We have a long sales cycle. That's painful at points. There are other businesses that are heavy CapEx. There are other businesses that have, labor issues. Everything has problems. You just sort of have to choose your hard. Pick what you're willing to deal with. So that's sort of like make sure you're not, screwing yourself by avoiding, companies that otherwise would be a good value if you just put a little elbow grease into it. Otherwise, the dam will break. You will, if you're not being picky, if you have a reasonable list of criteria, so you have a reasonable geographic location, and they're all sort of like that triple constraint theory, right? Like you can have if you have a broader geographic focus, you can have a broader EBITDA focus. You can raise your EBITDA limit. But if you have a really narrow geographic focus, you probably ought to look a little further down market and make sure you're capturing things, in your area. So if you're just looking in the Charlotte area, you probably shouldn't look at businesses that are $1 million EBITDA plus. Right, you're going to limit yourself quite a bit. It might be good for you to get in at the 500,000 EBITDA level. So, if you've got reasonable criteria, something will come through. And make sure as you're going through your communications with your brokers and I would recommend, if you have a timeline, not doing proprietary search. It's not a waste of your time. It's just spinning your wheels for very little return. Do it once you've already acquired, because then you're not in a hurry.
Yeah,
When I
that's a
bought,
great
I
point.
was adamant about buying. So I wanted to buy before the end of the year. I wanted to buy before December 30, whatever, 2022. And I missed it by 2 weeks, right? So I closed January 13th. So, I mean, like, I missed it, but I held true to that deadline. Like, that was my goal. And we all were pushing towards that goal. So I think if you give yourself a deadline, and a lot of times your financial runway may determine your timeline.
Right.
It sort of did for me, and also just my impatience, and I wanted to get out of what I was doing. Make sure your criteria are reasonable, and then just keep grinding. Like, develop that. I said this on Twitter, like, I will crawl over glass to get this deal done because I wanted it so bad.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And I know that sounds cliche, but I think if that's true for you, you will make it happen. You might have to get bloody, you might have to get dirty, but you can make it happen. And once you get to the other side, it'll all be worth it. But going through it, I mean, ask my wife, there's plenty of times when we were sitting in our house in Texas and I would just stare at the wall, and she would catch me a couple of times and I'd just be like staring at the wall. She's like, "Are you okay?" And it's like, "No, I'm having an existential crisis." But like, that will happen. Search is lonely, like we talked about, right?
Yeah.
And it's you got to be willing to grind through it. So it's, as long as you're buttoned up on your side, just keep pressing, keep making those, move the ball inches down the field, and eventually you're gonna bust one out, and you're gonna be able to run it in for a score. But I'm not downplaying the challenges of that at all, because I know it's tough. Find people to talk to. Find people that are going through the same. That's why I recommend people go to that boot camp, that Sam's boot camp. Is like, you get a cohort of people immediately, and you have follow-up calls with people. Even if you don't learn a thing, which I don't think is possible, but even if you don't learn a thing, you get people, and that matters. Having that support group matters.
Yeah.
So those would be the things I would advise if you feel like you're hitting a brick wall over and over.
I love that. That's super great advice for the search process and otherwise, as we talked about how you bridge your community across even post-closing and things like that. The grit, the tenacity, right? I mean, that's the difference, not just in who's going to have a successful search, but who's going to be a successful CEO, who's going to be a successful manager, who's going to build a successful roll-up strategy, whatever it may be. That's really great advice. Kevin, really appreciate you making the time. You referenced Twitter. You're active in the community. Where can people find you? Where can people follow along? And I'll pause for a second before you shout it out. You've been posting pretty regularly updates just on kind of your transition into the business and how things are going. So even just tactically for people who are new business owners or about to become new business owners, really actionable advice from you online. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at Bibelhausen on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. There's not many people named Bibelhausen, so I'm pretty easy to find. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm at kevin@bibelhausen.com. And also, look, if you're a searcher, I'd love to talk to you. Reach out. I know I'm inviting, tons of messages, but I enjoy those conversations. I'm happy to give you resources and point you in the right direction. And then, I've also joined Fruition Capital as a general partner. We're raising a fund to invest in searchers. So if you're interested in learning more about that, either as a searcher or investor, let me know, because we're only partnering with searchers who are as gritty as the people that we're talking about here. And I think you need that, in order to actually be successful. So it's been great to share
Kevin,
with you guys.
I want to give you a distinction of sorts, because I think this may be the least
Sure.
I've talked in a 60-minute period of time in my adult life. So
You going to be okay?
No, yeah, I'm doing great. No, I was just enjoying listening to you. So
Good.
Kudos for having an engaging conversation there.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mundane Millionaires. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Mundane Millionaires wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.